I'm Libby Villavicencio. I go by Libby V. And I'm going to share some slides with you and we're going to get going here. I am excited for today. This is a really popular workshop that I like to do that people find very helpful. So hopefully you'll find that today too. I invite you, I'm going to I'm going to ask some questions during this and I want you to feel free to put things in the chat if you're comfortable doing that. If you're not, no worries. And if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A area. So in the Q&A area, we ask you to put your questions there because we can kind of monitor and manage the questions and mark them off when they've been answered. And also, nobody else will be able to see your questions, so you don't have to worry about that. So does that all make sense, hopefully? All right, welcome to Using Data to Drive Impact. And just to take a couple of seconds to introduce myself, I'm Libby V, like I said before. I consider myself a nonprofit champion, meaning I champion nonprofit causes. So through leadership development, coaching, fundraising help, we help our clients raise more money and have more impact. I want to thank Brady Ware for this opportunity. Love working with Brady Ware. I think this is my third Take Five appearance, so really appreciate that. So thank you, Brady Ware. Here's our agenda for today. So we're going to talk about how to use data responsibly to build trust and drive funding, how to craft compelling narratives that honor community dignity and agency, and then how to transform your data into powerful stories that inspire action. And I like this little equation: ethical data plus ethical language equals greater impact. It's not going to hurt your funding abilities to do ethical storytelling, and it's the right thing to do. So I hope that this will provide some clarity for you on how to do that today. We are going to talk about data and how to responsibly collect it and all that stuff, but a lot of this will be spent in how do you use that data to tell good stories. Before I do that, let me go back for a second. Just put in the chat if you're comfortable. What is your biggest challenge with data or impact storytelling or storytelling in general? What's your biggest challenge around data or storytelling or both? If you could add it to the chat, that would be great. Would love to see that. What's your biggest challenge with data or storytelling? Client demographics, organizing them, keeping them updated, actually getting the info, yes. Figuring out how to track the long-term impact of a program on clients. These are really good. Thank you. Getting the information, so hard to measure prevention, yes. Finding ways to organize, present the data to drive change, conveying long-term impact. Yeah. Keeping stories relevant with so many other priorities, making sure that it reflects the true voice and is culturally responsive. Yeah, these are great. Thank you. Very helpful to understand where you're at with data. Data has been an issue or a challenge, I'll say, for as long as I've been in the nonprofit sector, and that's been a long time. So we'll tackle a little bit of that and help you think through, what are some ways to collect data where you don't have to have complicated systems. Put in the chat, please, if you would, yes or no, do you have a data collection system where you're either subscribing to an app or you have some type of system beyond an Excel spreadsheet or some other way, Google Sheets or whatever. So yeah, and if you want to add information like Jenny did, no, not really, just Excel, that's great too. So whatever you want to put, yes or no, and then some information if you have it, if you want to add it. Okay, so yes, not really, no, yes, okay. Yep. Multiple, completely unconnected systems, yes, Salesforce. Yep, okay, yep. All right, thank you, appreciate that. All right, And really, there's no right or wrong thing, right? If you're using Excel and it's working for you, great. But sometimes, you do have a system that you can use like Salesforce or something else. So thank you for answering that question. Okay. All right, let's get going then. So I'm going to tackle a lot of that, but feel free if I don't respond to what you put in the chat to ask a question, please, in the Q&A section. All right, let's talk a minute about collecting and managing data ethically. This has been, recently we've been engaged in lots of conversations in the nonprofit sector about telling ethical stories but I feel like we haven't talked a lot about how do you ethically collect and manage data. And so I wanted to talk to you about that. And if you want to get into any specifics beyond what I have for you today for the data piece, please ask those questions. So the way to collect and manage data is a few things, right? Make sure that you have informed consent, obviously. Always let folks know how their data will be stored or collected or used, right? All of those, not or, and ensure that your participants really understand that. That's the first thing that you should do. And I'm sure that some or most or all of you have a consent form, but really make sure that they understand what they're giving consent to, whether they have a language barrier or just haven't had the experience before of working with an organization that's going to collect their data. Just make sure they understand. Do no harm. So avoid collecting or sharing data that could stigmatize or expose vulnerabilities of people. Be transparent. You can talk to folks about how the data, not only how you're going to collect it and store it and all those things, but how does it help? How does it benefit the community? How does it help you? How does it help overall the broader world, right? So you can share that information, and I think that's important for people to understand. Just don't overplay it, right? And then engage your stakeholders, right? So the participants in your programs, ask for input on how you're framing their stories, right? So we'll talk a lot about that, but understand it's really the most ethical way to tell stories is to really engage the people who you're telling the stories about, so that they understand not only how you're going to use their story, but they have a voice in what their story says. When it's all said and done, before you share it out publicly, they've read it and given approval. And we'll dig more into that, like I said. And then really make sure your data is stored securely. And this is critical, right? That you have very secure places where you're storing their data. Make sure, if you can have an IT person, or a cybersecurity person, make sure that your records are secure. That's really critically important. Often when you buy a system or an application, they will tell you what the security is, of course, right? And probably have security measures. But if you're using something like Excel, in your own folders that are in the cloud, or Google Form or whatever, Google Forms, you want to make sure that your IT is secure. So that's really critical. Any questions on that? Okay. All right. No questions, I see. So let me go on. So let's talk about anything else on data. Before I move forward, I want to say we're going to move into the ethical storytelling piece. Any other questions about the data? Anything you want to talk about? Any questions? Anything that would be helpful to you? And again, there'll be time at the end for questions. So you can either ask them throughout or jot them down and ask them at the end in the Q&A session. We're going to have one of those at the end. So, all right, great. All right, let's talk about ethical database storytelling. So ethical storytelling has become a really hot topic. And for good reason, right? Like we want to be telling stories ethically. And I'm going to talk about a couple of aspects of doing storytelling ethically. And so one is really making sure, like I said, that people have a say in it, a say in their story. If they give permission to share their name and things like that, that they have the opportunity to really have a voice in developing their own story and making sure that they're really happy with the story that you're going to tell publicly before it goes out. The other thing is really the way that we tell stories, and this is the piece I think that's been missing in this conversation. Um, it has been very deficit focused, right? It's been very like these poor people and kind of like not respecting dignity or not recognizing that people have strengths. And so that's what I'd like to get us to do is kind of focus on both of those things, right? So know that the stories that you tell have power and they can influence how donors and funders think about the people that you serve in a broad way, as far as like communities of people, right? And not just individuals. And so I want to dig into that a bit, and we're going to do that. And then, so let's think about, how we should respect dignity and avoid tokenism and seek consent and co-authorship and highlight strengths. So we're going to dig into a lot of that right now. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's see. Do I feel security insurance is advisable? I think that anytime you're running a business, right, you want to have a good insurance agent. That's a really great question that you're comfortable with. And there is cybersecurity insurance, and it might not be a bad idea to have that. So I would talk to your insurance agent if you have one, and if you don't, there's somebody here in town that I know that does nonprofit insurance. She specializes in that, and she's with the National. I butcher this name every time. It's like the Nonprofit Insurance Alliance or the Alliance for Nonprofit Insurance, but she's wonderful, and doesn't and works to not overcharge nonprofits for things they don't need. But I really do recommend that you investigate cybersecurity insurance and also have good policies in place for managing data and information. So you need strong IT security policies in place. That's real important. Good question. Okay, I'm going to check the Q&A every now and then, but Jacob or Kara, if you see anything, will you please let me know? Um, okay, so let's keep talking about deficit thinking versus asset-based framing and how to do that. Um, I'm going to give you some practical tips today. We're going to practice a little bit doing that. So let's kind of compare these two, right? So deficit based, look, we've been trained. This is not the fault of nonprofits that we've been focused on deficit based. You've done nothing wrong. The only thing you've done is respond to funders. Funders have really made it so that they want the deficit based information, and that includes donors, so funders and donors. It's been the way of nonprofits for as long as I've been in the sector, and I've been in the sector my whole career, and that's been a long career. And so, we've been doing this, and it's been what everybody's expected is this focus on problems, labeling people, reinforcing stereotypes that exist already. And now we're really starting to see this big shift to being more asset based in our storytelling and just in our internal culture too, where we recognize and focus on people's strengths and the solutions that they already bring to the table when they come to us. And then it highlights systemic barriers versus personal character flaws, right? So we'll talk some about that, right? That there are systemic barriers that people are facing, and it doesn't mean that they are flawed as a person. It means that they face these barriers, which are real challenges to them in a lot of ways, right? And it really amplifies this notion of community leadership, which I love because I believe that we've lost that over the years, that notion of, it takes a village, and in a community that people come together to solve their own community issues. And so that is important to recognize that that is the case. All right. So why do you think the at risk, to label people at risk, is problematic? I wonder if you could just answer in the chat. Why do you think it's problematic to talk about people who are at risk, describe how they're at risk? Why do you think at risk is problematic? I'd love your thoughts here. Or do you think at risk is problematic? Oh, thank you, Jenny, for that link. It makes them sound lesser than. I actually don't think at risk is problematic. They don't want to know they're at risk, and they probably don't even think they're at risk. They probably don't define themselves that way. Yeah, it does. And Alexander, good point. It does determine their destiny in a way, right? It's generic and doesn't really define the issue. Great. Thank you for all these. Good. Under-resourced is under-resourced a better term? Oh, good. Good question. Hold that thought, Jenny. Love it. Yeah, so think about this. This was the thing that got me to really change my mind. Is I heard somebody say somewhere, risk is not something internal to people, right? It's imposed by systems that fail them, right? So if you think of a child, right? A child you know, doesn't isn't at risk, right, when they're born. A baby, a child isn't at risk, because they come out of the womb at risk, right? It's because of systems, because of what happens in systems. So, and that's not saying we're taking away their agency and just saying, oh, they're victims of a system, but we have to recognize that systemic barriers do exist and they do have an effect on people. So, and those can be simple, simple to complex. Systems, that they're interacting with everywhere. So thank you for all those. I want to make sure I caught them all. Yeah, words matter. And at risk states there's a problem with the person. Absolutely. Yes. Okay, so these are some reasons, right, that I just threw up here. You guys, you covered a lot of them, right? But it centers that notion of deficit thinking. It reinforces surveillance and control. It erases systemic harm, and it lacks intersectionality, right? So people are more complex than that, and they're interacting with lots of things and lots of people in their life. Oops, excuse me. Okay, let's talk about language alternatives now. So, how about these, right? So instead of, whoops, I skipped one. And problematic is, at-risk youth, right? These youth are at risk. It makes it sound like the kids are bad or they're engaging. Well, I am really challenged today, so sorry. It makes them sound like they are doing things to cause themselves to be at risk, right? And sometimes they are. There's no doubt about it, right? But let's not label everybody in a clump of that they're at risk. Underprivileged also, they probably wouldn't describe themselves as underprivileged. They might describe themselves as under-resourced, right? And then that they're vulnerable. And again, people don't feel like they're vulnerable. That seems like a weak position to be in, right? And they might not want to be described that way. So instead, we could just change our language a little bit, right? Instead of talking about at-risk youth, we could describe them as resilient but system-impacted youth. Instead of underprivileged, we could say they live in an under-resourced community. Instead of describing people as being part of a vulnerable population, we could talk about how they're communities that are navigating injustices or unjust systems. So these are just some ways to start reframing language that doesn't make people feel sound like they're in a really weak position and that they're at fault for what's going on with them. Um, this is a great way to educate donors and funders too, because to some extent our language is contributing to stigmatization of people, of groups of people. Um, so here are some ways to reframe, right? Instead of we serve at-risk youth, right? We partner with resilient youth navigating systemic barriers. Instead of we help vulnerable positions, you could say we're uplifting communities navigating systemic injustice. So those are just a couple of ways to reframe. Do these make sense to you? Yeah, good. Good comment. Thank you so much. Let me look up here. When someone is considered at risk, isn't that an external, not internal factor? Good question, Lloyd. I think that it can be construed that way, and I think we in the nonprofit sector see it that way. But I think people external to this nonprofit work might look at that as, oh, those are youth that are engaging in risky behaviors, right? And so it's not. I think we understand that in the sector. I don't know that other people do, and so just reframing it kind of makes it clear, right? That they do have resilience factors, right? They do have strengths, but they're not entirely um, at fault themselves. They're not an at-risk person. Um, Thank you, Bill. Okay, great. Thanks. Keep the comments coming. Keep the questions coming in the Q&A if you have them. Let me look here. No questions right now. Okay, good. So let's talk about how to apply this to your own data and your stories, right? We talked about always seek informed consent, let people co-author their narratives, which is such an empowering thing, right? If you get somebody who says, yes, I would be willing, I'm happy to share my story. If it helps your organization, you've helped me a lot, and I'd love to, pay it forward, which is wonderful. And you're going to find those people if you ask, especially if you are letting them be involved in the writing of the narratives. And people enjoy that a lot. They can sit and they can tell you your story. You could be writing it up, and then share it with them and give them some time to mull it over and edit it if they want to, right? And so that is a really comforting thing for people who you work with. And you might get more cooperation, or I don't want to say cooperation, you might get more people who want to provide their story to you, knowing that they're going to be able to have the say of how it reads, what it says. And so then frame data and stories around community strengths and systemic truths. And that way we're not adding to the stereotyping of people who use our services. And I really think that that's a beautiful thing to do, right? Okay, so let's do just a really mini workshop right now. So think about a phrase that your organization uses when you talk about your participants. And no judgment here, no judgment. Look, we've all been using deficit-based language. We all have, all of us. It's just, it's part of the nonprofit culture to do that. So don't feel like you've been doing something wrong. You haven't. You've been doing what you've been asked to do. So think about a common phrase that your organization uses, and just jot it down, right? Jot it down. Like, well, how do you talk about your participants? So if I just met you and I said, hey, it's nice to meet you. Tell me about your organization and what you do and who do you serve? How would you describe the people that you serve? That's what I'm looking for. So, what would be like a sentence or two of how you would answer that question? Who do you serve? Or in a grant, this is even better. In a grant application, it always asks for describe the people that you serve. So how have you been doing that? Um, we work with people on, I'm going to say this because I'm in Columbus, Ohio, on the, you know, in the downtown area of Columbus, Ohio, who, and what do you say, right? So, what do you say about your folks? Now, let's think about how you can reframe it um, using this asset based language. I like that notion of neighbors, Lloyd. I really like that. That's really great. Okay. You serve adults, children and adults with disabilities and special needs. Okay. And when you have to describe that need, right? What's your need statement in a grant application, right? Um, so what would you describe as that need? What's the need that your people have, right? When they come to you? Um, okay, economically disadvantaged. Okay. So when you talk about, what are their needs, or why do you need to be doing this? Why does your community need your programming? How do you describe your participants then? And how would you reframe that? How would you reframe it? Using some positive language. So instead of saying maybe like we serve children, um, you know, birth to five who um, are living in homes of poverty with uneducated parents, and they come to us, um, developmentally delayed, right? So how would we frame that? Yeah, I like that you shifted from clients. Okay, so how would you shift your narrative? Anybody want to take a stab at describing the needs of their participants in their programming in an asset way? Or do you want to take a stab at what I just said? You know, I'll describe it a little bit. I would say we work with children birth to five whose parents are concerned with their development and are searching for a child development center where they will be stimulated and get on their developmental level. Um, no, saying that kind of takes away from, saying that they're in poverty homes. And what happens when we do that a lot is that we kind of facilitate this stereotype of poor people have kids that are delayed, right? That if a kid is in a home that is considered in poverty, that they're going to be delayed just because of that. Or if we say, often we say, children who are in homes with a single parent. Well, do we need to reinforce that stereotype, and what does that add to the story? It more adds to the stereotype again, right? That single parent families have kids that are developmentally delayed because they're flawed in some way. So, yeah. And, it's kind of the notion of I used to work, somebody put a question about homeless. I used to work in years ago, managed, a shelter for people who were experiencing homelessness. And we called them homeless people, right? Homeless people, homeless people, homeless people. But it's like, that's not a necessarily permanent thing, right? So we've shifted in that arena to people experiencing homelessness, because often it's temporary, right? It's that something happened that triggered this status of not having a place to live. So just shifting the language a little bit can really make a huge difference in stereotypes, and get people to think in a different way. Any questions or anything now? Okay, is this making sense? Resonating? What are you thinking? Yeah, we enhance the quality of life for individuals and families with disabilities. Okay. Probably want to expand on that a little bit, but I know you do. It's just a one sentence, right? Today in the chat. So, really the takeaways today are that, so far we've talked about ethical storytelling really honors dignity. Remember, people come to you with strengths. They come to you with their strengths, they come to you with their challenges, but they do have those strengths. And we need to make sure that we're communicating that because we don't want to help continue the stereotyping of people. We need to use asset based language because it strengthens community trust. I know I would feel much better if I would feel much more trusting of going to nonprofits if I knew that they could see that I was a human being who had assets, who had strengths, and who just might need a little bit of help, right, to get to a next phase or whatever. And also, ethical storytelling drives deeper, lasting impact. So if you can get clear and tell your stories in an ethical way, that will resonate with people and give them clarity, funders, donors. And also it really empowers your clients in a way and your participants in a way that makes them trust you, and they will engage more with you through that. So it really does work. Thank you, Michelle. Appreciate it. Okay, questions, comments right now? All right. We're going to talk some more about data in a little bit because I want you to open it up for questions and stuff about, you had a lot of comments about data. Okay, so I wonder if you would commit to just auditing one piece of your, not right now, one piece of your organization's communication for deficit language, right? So I don't know if you have like client stories, if you have your needs statement that you copy and paste into your grant applications or put into appeals for donations or whatever it is, but pick one thing and just change it into a strengths based description, right? Just change it into strengths based, into asset based. And then I challenge you to draft one new story with an asset based lens about a participant, right? So I think it'd be cool to go to your needs statement that you use in grant applications or whatever and redraft that as asset based. And then also a story about a participant, a success story. For a long time, we didn't even tell successes, did we? How many of you have shifted to maybe, when you think about writing up a story that might be used in a grant application or a report to a funder or an appeal to a donor, have shifted to telling the happy ending to a story at least, right? So let's take it a step further and use that for our upfront story, right? From our upfront story, not just tell that we tell the success story in the end, but when we describe people when they come to us before they've had a success with us, their story in an asset-based way. Has there been recent testing to determine that funders are more likely to award grants with asset-based language? Um, I don't know of that research. I just know that it's a more ethical way to tell the story. But I would imagine what's going to happen is that um, funders are going to start realizing, oh, these aren't poor, pitiful, pathetic people. They come with strengths that then a nonprofit is recognizing. Like they're gonna, I think more positively about nonprofits who recognize that people come with strengths. And we're also going to tear down those stereotypes of people. Because if you think about it, those stereotypes can be weaponized against people as well, right? When it comes to, um, things that happen with, folks that are ostracized because they need, maybe help with purchasing food for a while, that they get some benefits like that, and people look down on them. And I think we are contributing to that as an industry in a big way. And we're a big industry. I think we are the third largest employment industry in the country, right? And so we have a big impact. So the stories that we tell, they resonate big time out there. So good questions. Keep them coming, please. And the interaction is great. Okay. Any other questions on this stuff? Will you do this? Will you take it upon yourself to, to rewrite some things? And if you even, I'm going to give you my email address in a minute. I would even review it for you if you want to, like as a before and after. You could send me the before and the after. If that's helpful to you, I'm happy to do that for you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about some things I have for you that I want to share with you. So if you want to jot down my email address, I have some templates that I put together that I think will be real helpful for you. And I'm going to walk through those and kind of show you what they are. And then I want you to feel free to request them. So let me pull that up now. Sorry about that. I have to move around some windows. Okay, so these are the things that I would be happy to share with you. Let me know if you're not seeing my screen right now and you're not seeing this document, Quick Language Reframing Guide. I'm going to assume you're seeing it as long as I can't see it. So this is just a guide I put together, right, with some of the things that we talked about today as far as, problematic terms, but versus some more positive strengths-based terms that you can use. And so this is just a document that you can use to kind of test yourself before you finish, publishing whatever that means to you, hitting the submit in a grant application or putting together an appeal or an impact report or whatever it is. You could ask yourself these questions, right? Is this language empowering or deficit based? Have I avoided stereotypes or pathologizing? And am I showing communities that is full of strength and possibility, which I think is really powerful, that we have we can do that. We can make that happen where people are not seen as just having weaknesses and are problematic, but that they have strengths. And there are some examples in here, quick tips and that kind of thing. And then I have this ethical story checklist here for you. When you're going to work with a participant in your program, a neighbor, as Lloyd said, which I love, you can walk through this, right? This first steps, consent and co-authorship. So how do you get that, right? Framing and the language, privacy and dignity, and it covers all those things. Community impact. So these are just some tools to help you. And if you email me, I'll send these to you. I'll send you the link to access the Google folder, and you can just download them to your own desktop. And then this is a story development worksheet. So how do you frame these stories, right? So first the challenge, and then the evidence, right? This is where your data comes in, and maybe some testimonials. And then what were the solutions? And then what's the call to action, right? So that's that piece. And then the last template I created is data collection planning, right? So this is how you decide if this is the data you should be collecting, um, and what you need to collect. This will help you get clarity on that. And then also what's your data security plan, how do you involve the community, and what are the risks, right? So this will walk you through some of that stuff, some data collection. Okay, any questions, comments, any of that? Okay, great, thank you so much. Okay. And so let's go back to this slide deck and we'll get some time here for questions and answers. Okay. Again, thanks to Brady Ware. So appreciative of you. Love partnering with you. Brady Ware is an amazing company. They do a lot for nonprofits. I don't know if you've hit their website. How many of you have been on the Brady Ware website and found all the resources they have on there? Because there's a bunch. And I go to it frequently to see what else they've added recently. There's a lot of good stuff on there. So check it out if you haven't. Um, Yeah, due to the current political climate, we try to reframe who we serve to stay off of radars. We just call everyone patrons or app promise communities. Yeah, that's definitely a reality right now, isn't it? Yeah. Uh, Definitely some people, I mean, it's for real. I get it. I understand. I want to tell you, I really do understand where you're coming from. This is a tough time right now for nonprofits. So, oh, you're getting audited by Brady Ware right now. That's great. Not audited by. They're doing your audit for you. That didn't sound right. All right. Good. They do good work. Yeah. Okay. How do you navigate EDI language in the current political climate? It's a good and very relevant question. And I think you have to decide that for yourselves. I don't think any of us can judge, what you do with that language. Um, I think, being creative is important, right? There's something to be said for, you know, uh, not necessarily changing what you do, right? But how you message it, unfortunately. And also, you have to decide. I think that's something that probably your board and leadership should weigh in on, right? Are we going to change all of our language in order to keep this administration from, coming after us? And it's a really serious question and a really important conversation to have, I think, with your board and staff together. And then come up with some policies or some, acceptable words or something. Some people are just saying, we're just going to keep doing what we've been doing, right? And I don't think you necessarily have to use the terms diversity, equity, inclusion, access, those kinds of things, um, you know, to get your message across. But I also think that there are so many words. If you look at their words that are not allowed, it is so broad. Um, I think community is one of them. So if you want to really stay away from those words, make sure you understand which ones they are. They are the obvious ones, right? The diversity, equity, inclusion, but they go very much further than that. So there are a lot more than that. Now is the time for all your questions that you didn't get answered yet. So we like to leave time for that. So what else do you want to talk about? Data. You want to go back to anything around that? Um, anything related to data, storytelling, words, anything else? How many of you are, if you don't mind sharing, are doing that, are taking a look at your words that you're using at this point? I think most nonprofits are. They're at least having the conversation, like, is our language problematic as far as the current administration? Um, so yeah, definitely. Okay. And do you feel like you're doing that? Yeah. Uh-huh, renaming whole departments and job titles. I've heard that before. Yep, got it. So you're evaluating all that. Yeah. It's a weird thing to have to think about, isn't it? And at least in the ways you have to think about it now. It's kind of odd, but yeah. And do you feel like do you feel like you're still staying true to your work and your mission and the people that you work with, or do you feel like it's kind of watering down and making things convoluted? I'd love to know that. Do you feel like the language discussion is leading to better language, not as effective language? Um, any thoughts on that? Okay. Further questions? What do you have? All right. Let's see. I think we answered those. Can you show the slide with the deficit? Yeah, happy to do it. Deficit based versus asset based. Yep. Let me pull that up. Yeah, I'm happy to show any more slides. You'll also get these slides, by the way. So um, you're going to get a link from Brady Ware to be able to grab these slides. So here you go. Any other questions? Questions, questions, questions.
Good morning, Libby. Thanks again for the presentation today. I've got a few questions from the Q&A to fire at you here if you're ready.
Great. Sure. And
Wonderful.
then there was one in the chat I'll answer afterwards, or I can do it
Perfect.
before if you want.
Oh, if you want to handle the one in the chat first, that's
Okay.
great.
So how do you create a culture of storytelling, i.e., so that stories come from all staff? It's a great question. I think it is sitting down and talking to staff one-on-one who might come upon stories, right? And creating some very simple form where they can submit, hey, I've got a story, please help me, to someone, right? To whoever that person is. They need to know, like, if I come across a story, what do I do? Do I try to get the story myself? Do I turn to, a development person or a communications person to lead that? So just, sitting down one-on-one, talking to people, talking about how important stories are for you, and then giving them some kind of easy way to make sure that a story is captured. And so getting some clarity on that, it can be really helpful. So good question. Okay. Sorry, Jacob. Go ahead.
No, not at all. So again, we talked about how important it is to collect and analyze data. What are some tools we can use that are affordable to do that? I know a lot of our attendees had some tools available, but are there some affordable suggestions that you have?
Yeah, I think more and more apps are coming on every day, right? And so if you're not subscribed to TechSoup, TechSoup.com, TechSoup.org, I think it is, then I would definitely get on there and poke around and see if you can find anything that they have discounted prices for nonprofits for software and things like that, QuickBooks, all kinds of stuff. So if you're not already using them, is anybody using TechSoup? They've been around forever. They're reliable. They have really good prices for nonprofits. Most nonprofits, bigger nonprofits, know about TechSoup, but I find that a lot of people just haven't heard of it yet. So, yeah, for 20 years, Lloyd, right? Yeah, you and me both. TechSoup is great. And so keep your eyes out for that. And also, there's just, as you know, right, just new apps being developed just constantly every day. Keep your eye out for that. So one of my favorite newsletters for nonprofits is Nonprofit Tech for Good. Um, Subscribe to it because they'll keep you up to date on all of that stuff. And they also, will tell you about the software, right? So that's really helpful. And then the other thing is that depending on the size and scope of your organization, um, I would I would definitely think about starting with something free, inexpensive, simple to start with, whether that's an Excel spreadsheet or a Google form. Um, Start with that. Make sure your IT is secure and everything, but that can be the best way to start. Those tools are getting better and better all the time as well, right? And so those can be pretty usable. Things like Salesforce they offer free packages to nonprofits. It's a very complex system, extremely complex. So those of you that have Salesforce, you know, um, could weigh in on this. Do you recommend it? Does it work well? It's a pretty big, heavy lift to learn it if you don't know it already. it can be helpful, but it is pretty complicated and pretty complex. So if you're a bigger organization that has, lots of staff that can engage with it, then that'll work as well. There's a local to Columbus here, a company that does this work. They have both the software and then they can help, nonprofits identify what outcomes they want to achieve and so what data they need to track, and it's called impact measurement. That's another option. Some of these can be pretty pricey, but like I said, maybe all you need is Excel or Google. So use what you need and try not to get more than you need, and also really think through, what do you need to be able to get out with your data, like what data do you need to get out. Think of that first, and then decide what data to be collecting. What do you need to do with the data, right? Sometimes organizations collect a lot of data that they just never use, and be careful with that. So and I've heard some organizations, using AI to kind of analyze data sets. I don't have a problem with that as long as you're removing all the identifying information of people, names, addresses, email addresses, because you are, uploading it basically to the web. Even though, your chat kind of is supposed to be remaining, only with you, there you're uploading things to the web. So just make sure all of that is removed. Hopefully that answered that. That was a long answer, sorry.
It was great. And you touched on that a little bit, and we talked about making sure we had the viability of cybersecurity insurance. Are there some tips, best practices to ensure that that data that we collect is secure?
Yeah, I would definitely invest in having someone, an IT security expert. There are companies, all over the place that do this work to do an audit. Um, some of that can be kind of expensive. If you have an IT company, they're probably providing that for you. But, everything from, testing staff on whether they'll open a phishing email, or click on a phishing link, is good, right? And educating about that, right? Educating about how do you look at an email and decide not to open it, or if you open it, not to click on something, right? And some organizations even send out phishing emails that aren't going to cause any harm, obviously, right? Just to test their staff to make sure that they're paying attention, because there have been stories of people where, organizations where a staff person clicked on a phishing link, and ended up, corrupting all their records. And so you have to be pretty careful about all that, especially since we're all working on the cloud now. And so that stuff is real. It does happen. And nonprofits get targeted as much as anybody else, right? So it's worth having, a cybersecurity check, whether one of your board members helps you do that because they work in a corporation that has that information and they can guide that work, or if you have to pay somebody to do it. So
So all of our attendees, they do important and honorable work. So it's important to share their stories of success and good news. Um, so with that, what are some options if they don't have clients or participants that are okay with sharing their story?
yeah, that's a really good question. So if you run into that, um, and sometimes, to be quite honest, the barrier is even, that there's not enough staff, um, to be able to do that, right? To be able to interview participants individually and track down those stories, and that can be a barrier to getting good stories too. So I suggest you just take your data, kind of take everything you know about your participants, and just create a story that's based in reality, but is just an amalgamation of all your clients or a bunch of clients, and maybe create 5 or 6 of those stories. And that way it kind of eliminates needing to get permission from a participant, have them review all that. If you can kind of throw it all together and tell those stories that way. And that's perfectly ethical to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. It's honest, it's true. No problem with that whatsoever. And Lloyd said you've done that a lot, telling stories like that, amalgamate like everybody together, and then kind of carve out these stories that are based in reality, but they're not about one particular participant. So that's okay. That's okay to do that. You have permission to do that. You can do that. And that's often an easier way to tell those stories. So.
Perfect. And so then with our ever-changing world and the introduction of technology, would you say then it's ethical to resource to AI to either analyze our data that we've collected or help create the stories?
Yeah, I think can be a really good tool. You have to just use it ethically, right? And so again, take out any personally identifying information, and AI can help you parse out, the data in a way that kind of highlights, um, that can pull it together and spit it back out to you in a way that helps you to be able to use that data, right? So you have to be the key is to prompt it right, right? So and that's not hard. It's just a simple matter of saying, I need data that tells me, whatever, and keep messing with it. And if you haven't been using AI yet, that's okay. You'll learn it really fast. And there are lots of videos out on YouTube of how to prompt AI, and I would encourage you to watch those videos and or take workshops if they're available of how to use AI effectively. Um, as far as doing stories, yes, I think that's fine if you especially if you feed it some of your data. Um, and you'll probably have to feed it not just the quantitative data, but the qualitative data, right? So you might have to put in, a description of people or whatever it is to get out those good stories. And again, as long as you're is providing the information about your participants, again, without their identifying information, um, AI can put together a pretty good story for you or stories for you. So yes, I think that can be an effective tool. Your donor management program come with AI? Yes. So Lloyd, which one are you using? I'm curious which one. A lot of our applications are now AI informed and AI run, so it's not uncommon, and it can be helpful. Just make sure you're not just automatically taking what AI gives you, but that you're reviewing it very thoroughly and that it's okay. All right, great. Questions? Any more questions? We've got time. Happy to answer anything. Happy to um, you know, respond to whatever you need. So email address, I'm happy to share my email address in the chat if you want to copy and paste it if you didn't grab it before. And again, you're going to get the link for the slides, but if you want those extra documents that I shared, just email me and I'll get those to you, okay?
I just wanted to take 1 second to thank you for your time and sharing your expertise on behalf of Brady Ware. So thank you very much, and thank you to all in attendance for your time. And we look forward to seeing you again at our next conference. So with that, I'll let Libby remarks there. I appreciate your
Yeah,
time.
yeah, thank you so much for being here. This is important work. For many of us that have been in the field for a long time, it's a shift in how we do things, and it always takes some time. So give yourself some time if you and to think this through and start rewriting things if you need to, and to be thinking in an asset-based way. So I appreciate you being here for that, and thank you so much for your time.